すみません、失礼します。マイクテスト、マイクテスト。はい、失礼しました。
Hello, hello. We are getting started. So welcome to OpenID Foundation Workshop. どうもOpenID Foundation のワークショップに、お越しいただきありがとうございます。またKDDI 様にこのような素晴らしいファシリティをお貸しいただきましてありがとうございます。厚く御礼申し上げます。今日はですね、まあ、今日本語で喋ってますけど、あと全部英語になると思いますけれども、OpenID Foundation で現在やっている、ワーキンググループですとか、その他の活動について、非常に多岐にわたるんですけれども、ご紹介していく場所です。ですので、ここで聞いていただければ、大体どういうことをやっているところなのかっていう現状まで、キャッチアップできるだろうなと思っておりますので、ぜひ役に立てていただければと思います。 で、それに先立ってなんですけれども、実はOpenID ファウンデーションのワークショップでは皆さんの発言をですね、きちんとフィードバックに取り込んだりとか、そういったのをするために Notewell というのをしています。So, for everybody participating in this workshop has to actually adhere to what you have in front of you, the Notewell. It's for us to be able to record your statements and so on and so forth. So please take a minute to read it. And I need you to agree to those. Agreed? Okay, so that's good. So again, I'd like to thank KDDI for preparing for this excellent facility, as well as making all sorts of resources available to us. Please give a round of applause for them. And OpenID Foundation specifications are, I stopped counting it, so I don't know how many of them are right now, but this is a brand new picture, graphics of what we have at OpenID Foundation. And I guess the focus area of today is the area where we have yellow star on it. So, oops. Well, translation panel. Well, it's not coming to me. Anyways, stopped working. So that's the workshop agenda. It's full of it. Hopefully we get through them, without too much delays. I don't know, this computer stopped working somehow, but okay, now it's working. Okay, yeah. All right, so that was my welcome and Notewell. And the first item on the agenda is Austen Working Group update, and it's online presenter, right? David Brossard. So David, are you ready for that?
Yes, I am. Do you control the slides, Nat?
Yes, David, I'll take care of advancing slides for you. This is Mike Les.
Hey, Mike. All right. So first of all, thank you everyone for attending this session. I'm super happy to be here and be able to present on behalf of Auth0. So Auth0 actually started initially way back when in the summer of 2022 at Identiverse, and it kind of went a little dormant until we revived it in the summer of 23, also at Identiverse. And a group of us, quite a few from the vendor side, but also from the customer side, got together and said, well, authorization hasn't really picked up as much as, say, other standards like OAuth and OpenID Connect. And we think the reason is that people don't know the different patterns, the different ways of using authorization, and there isn't really a good standard way of asking for an authorization request and getting an authorization decision back. So that's kind of the main driver for Auth0. But of course, why even authorization? Well, the reality is that oftentimes when you compromise an identity, you get access to whatever that identity can do, right? It's kind of like entering a house. If you can break into the house, suddenly you have access to every single room, and you have access to the fridge and the TV and everything. And so identity attacks actually convert into much bigger attacks because we don't have a handle on authorization. And that's what we're trying to solve, we the authorization vendors, but also we the Auth0 working group. And actually, if we tie it back to OWASP, the number one threat on OWASP in the top 10 as of I want to say 2021 is the last time they've updated it, is broken access control. And it's as simple as things like a user using an API and they're supposed to be getting access to their own medical record, but they can actually do an indirect object reference, and suddenly they can get access to someone else's medical record. And because there was no authorization in place, that can happen, right? So this is the main driver behind Auth0. Next slide, Mike. The other aspect is that authorization is really hard to manage. It tends to be the way that I typically pitch it is that identity kind of sits in the hands of the one team. I know I'm oversimplifying, but identity usually firmly sits in the hands of the IAM team. And then, if you go way back when, the LDAP team. But it's generally controlled by that one team that have a very good handle over identity and authentication and user management. On the other hand, when you write an app and you want to consume identity or authentication, you can just talk to that team and plug right into the authentication process and you're good to go, right? But with authorization, it's a little different. Authorization is a two-sided equation where on the one hand, you have identity data. Of course, we need to know who you are or what that thing is, but it's also application data. And that's why it's hard to manage, because you're combining things that only the app developers or the app owners or the product owners know with identity data controlled by a central team. When that happens, each application ends up doing its own thing. And when each application ends up doing its own thing, you end up with authorization silos. In the authorization world, we're very much at the stage where identity and authentication were 20 years ago, where each app would develop its own user store, its own user management, its own password management even, right? And we want to break down those silos. We really want to have one consistent way of handling authorization. And the other aspect that I already mentioned, there is no widely adopted standardized way for authorization components to communicate. So when I say components, I'm mainly thinking of a client, or in authorization parlance, we call it a policy enforcement point, talking to an authorization engine, typically called a policy decision point. There is, of course, the work that NIST have done around ABAC, but they define more the architecture. They've also defined NGAC. There is also the work that has been done by XACML, but XACML is, as old as SAML, and it is XML based, so it's time to move to something a little bit better. And it's not just having the standards, right? It's also talking to the SaaS folks, the COTS folks, app developers, and telling them, hey, there's an authorization pattern out there, or there's several authorization patterns out there. You should be using them. You should be leveraging them. And by the way, here's an SDK. Here's a simple way you can ask for authorization. And that's really our goal in the Auth0 working group, is to simplify that and make it easy enough that people will want to adopt authorization instead of still doing their own way. Next slide. So when we look at the different areas that we want to focus on, first and foremost, it's authorization protocols and formats, right? So the very first protocol and format, we'll see that in the following slide, is the PEP PDP, but we also want to look at policy management. And then authorization could be inside an org, kind of like you have employee identity, you very much have employee or internal use cases for authorization, things like just business applications and making sure that an employee gets access to the right data, finance apps, and so forth. It could also be into org, where it could be consumer facing, or it could be use cases like export control, where you want to have you are a company that builds planes and you want to share data with another company that builds planes, but they happen to be outside of your country of origin. So you're an American company dealing with an Italian company. There are authorization rules that you need to abide by, not just business rules, but also legal frameworks that you need to abide by. And then the authorization could be between components. And if you look at the whole slew of authorization models that Open Policy Agent has developed, you'll see that they focus very much on infrastructure and authorization between components, where orchestration matters a lot. But it could also be between systems, between APIs of different companies. And that's where we've seen a lot of success in older standards like XACML, as an example, and also API gateways trying to achieve that level of authorization. Next slide. So we really want to increase interoperability between existing standards to authorization. So when we say existing standards, we have, first of all, different ways of doing authorization. It could be policy-based, it could be graph-based, it could be what I call Zanzibar inspired. So for those of you who don't know Zanzibar, It's a paper that was written by Google, I want to say between 2015 and 2018. I don't quite remember the date. It's based on an idea that you could do access control lists at scale. Policy-based, oftentimes referred to as attribute-based access control, is kind of the original way of doing fine-grained authorization. It's the model that NIST proposes in their ABAC paper from 2013. It's also where you find standards like Alpha, the abbreviated language for authorization, or REGO, the language used within Open Policy Agent, or IDQL, which is a language that aims to sort of map in between those different languages. Now, I do want to point out that at Auth0, at least for now, we're not in the policy language game. We do not want to create yet another language. I'm sure you're all very familiar with the XKCD picture where someone says, oh my God, there's 14 standards, let's create a new standard. We don't want to do that. And part of the reason we don't want to do that is that the languages that exist today, they're already pretty good. They do their job well, right? The other aspect, of course, is graphs. So you have companies like 3Edges and Signal that have a graph-based approach to authorization. And then finally, like I mentioned, Zanzibar, so things like OpenFGA, Topaz, SpiceDB, so on and so forth. What we want to do is make sure that if a company wants to use an authorization solution from any one of those three bullets, that they can do that in a standardized way. So it's very much about standardizing the PEP PDP side of things, making sure that when you send an authorization request to an authorization service, that service could be alpha-based, it could be Cedar-based, it could be graph-based, it doesn't matter, it's going to understand it, it's going to reply back to you. We also want to make sure that the PEP PDP standard actually addresses the different use cases that we see in the authorization world today. And right now we see three. We see what I'm going to call binary authorization. Can a user do X? And you reply with a yes or a no. We see batch binary authorization requests where we say, can Alice, Bob, Carol view, edit, delete document 1, 2, 3, and then you get as many responses back or decisions back as you do the product of those things. And then you also have something called in the current spec, a tool who's the lead author on the spec called it the search API, which is more along the lines of, hey, what can I do? Or which documents can I edit? Or which documents can I delete between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m.? So these are the use cases that we want to expose through the PEP PDP interface. But beyond that, we also want to tackle at a later stage the PAP aspect, policy management, what it means to manage policies while not touching the language in different products. So how can I post a policy? How can I update a policy while still, avoiding, we very much feel that, going down the path of defining yet another grammar is going to be a pitfall that we really want to stay away from. And then the third thing that we really want to do, and it's perhaps the first thing, I should have put that on my slide, is establishing and promoting the use of externalized authorization as the preferred pattern of authorization. Oftentimes, I'm from a vendor, and when I talk to other vendors, I get the same vibe that their prospects, their customers, they keep saying, oh, I would rather just build authorization myself in my own product. It's just simpler. Or I don't know what that ABAC thing or that REBAC relationship-based access control thing is. So we want to increase the knowledge. We want to educate people to these different patterns because it'll make authorization easier for everyone, both in terms of implementing, operating, and then auditing eventually. Next slide. So the proposed specs, number one, the description of standard authorization patterns, the use cases that go along with it, the communication patterns, the integration patterns. So the typical one that we inherit from this ABAC is you have a PEP, sends a yes/no authorization request to a PDP. Okay, that's the first way. But there's other ways that we could look at doing authorization. If we look at the work that OAuth has been doing, for instance, with rich authorization requests, or some of the work that is being done or has been done within GNAP that Justin Richer has been driving, these are other patterns that we could explore that we want to formalize within Auth0. So obviously OAuth and OpenID, they're very much identity-centric. Auth0 is going to look at the whole picture, not just the identity side of the equation, but the entire equation, including the application side. So the second bullet, of course, is that famous PEP PDP API. This week, as a matter of fact, we're doing a prior arc review of how people are doing PEP PDP. So on Tuesday, we had a presentation by AWS on how Cedar handles the PEP PDP interface. On Thursday, tomorrow, my time, we'll be doing a presentation on how Alpha handles authorization. And then on Friday, we'll look at how OAuth handles authorization requests. All that information, by the way, is in our meeting minutes. It's stored in HackMD. I have a link later in the slides. So if you want to read the prior art and figure out what it is we've been discussing and how we're adopting the new standard, go check the notes. Feel free to ask me, by the way. I'm more than happy to take questions. And then the last part is how you also carry the policies and data from the administration point, the PAP, where you manage the policies, where you manage the configuration, to the authorization services, the policy decision points. In terms of timeline, by the way, the first two bullets are the most urgent. We do want to, and I can't remember if I put this in the slides later, but we do want to aim for an interop of the second bullet by Identiverse 24. So that's at the end of May. Next slide. And then the audience really for Auth0 is developers and architects, to educate them, educate us to the different ways of doing authorization. And again, if we do the parallel with authentication, hopefully no one today would think of inventing their own authentication protocol. No one today would think of storing username passwords in the clear in a database. I mean, the age of MySQL and hashing your password hopefully should be gone, and you should be delegating that to a proper identity management or user management product. We also want to talk to SaaS vendors. If you think about it, right, if you're going to be building a ride-sharing app or a medical journal app, you're a specialist of medical records. You know how to do that, but should you really spend cycles on developing the authorization, or should you just externalize that authorization? That also applies to cloud platforms. So we have, of course, Cedar and AWS, but we could look at Google and Microsoft and other platforms and tell them, hey, this is how you could tackle authorization. We could look at COTS, and then just enterprise architects that are looking into best practices and patterns for their authorization needs within a given company. Next slide. So this is the list of proposers. Like I said, quite a few of us are from vendors. So you have companies like 3Edges, Signal, Axiomatics, Strata, SailPoint, Acerto, that were all authorization vendors. We've actually reached out to other authorization vendors, not on this list, companies like Cerbos, that have really interesting approaches. We firmly believe that the more points of view we can get from out there, from people already doing it, the better the standard will be eventually. Next slide. So a couple of useful links based on recommendation from the, I think it was a shared signals group who were using HackMD. We followed in the exact same pattern. So we have a HackMD site where we keep meeting minutes, where we keep all of the API work as it's being worked on. And then we eventually commit the final version into the OpenID GitHub. And then we also use Slack. If you want to ask us questions, feel free to reach out to us through Slack or any other means, or of course the mailing list. Next slide, which I think is also the last one. So January 2024, we're roughly 6 months old. If we look at the new date, we're heavily working in the prior art section, so looking at older standards that exist, XACL, Alpha, Cedar, OAuth, but also Open Policy Agent, and also, like I mentioned, and looking at how these standards do an authorization request and trying to find the common ground and the common use cases that we want to keep inside of Auth0. Check out this document. It is incomplete, but it does have a few sections and then pointers to different standards that exist. Feel free to comment on the document. You can do that through HackMD. Whether you're a member of Auth0 or not doesn't really matter. And then, like I mentioned, we're also working on interop scenarios. So there's a separate document for that Yves Mailer is driving. And finally, we have two things happening at Identiverse and or EIC, depending on acceptance. Number one is a panel submission that Omri Gazit of Acerto put together, where there will be, I think, 4 or 5 of us from the Auth0 working group talking about the goal of Auth0 and what we want to achieve. And then we're aiming for an interop, same time frame, end of May, early June. Hopefully by then we will have had time to implement a first version, an implementer's draft, if you will, of the Auth0 PEP PDP interface. And I think, Mike, that was my last slide. Yep. Hopefully that wasn't too fast or too slow.
Thanks, David. Any questions for David? Thank you again.
All right, my pleasure. Tom, over to you.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Tom Sato, and today I'm going to talk about shared signal and what's going on in this working group. First of all, I'd like to say that give a brief explanation of what this standard is and what we try to achieve. So originally, the working group members, the originators, felt that authentication was happening only at the login, and there's no continuous monitoring and no real-time ability to mitigate and remediate if there is a security incident. So we created a framework, a standard, whereby we would monitor continuously, share signals if there is a security event, and share that intelligence to do mitigation and remediation. And we make sure that not only the end users or the device is continuously monitored during the session, but out of session, whatever the event is happening, there is a mechanism for the communication framework to actually communicate and make sure that that person or the device is either session is revoked or the account is stopped, and making sure that there's a mitigation and a remediation happening. So what we have created is a standard, and we work closely with IETF because we felt that some of these specifications needed to be written up in a technical format that is belongs more to the IETF realm rather than what we were trying to do, which is the application of the technology itself. And I'd like to thank Mike and Sakimura specifically because we based on their work in the JSON Web Tokens and the security event token and so many of these specifications to enable this framework, which is a webhook. It's a secure webhook. The shared signal framework, the spec itself, it describes the communication the receiver who would take action. And that the message that is transmitted are described in the CAPE spec and the RISC spec. CAPE is more to do with controlling session, whereas the RISC spec is all about account protection upon a very serious credential breach event or so on. So we have been working closely with a variety of vendors during the past 5 years. And finally, this last month, in fact, we've finalized the implemented draft number 2. And that was approved by the board, the foundation's members. We also written up a blog post describing what's new in the ID2 specification. And at the moment, we are currently working on the interop specification, which describes how variety of parties could collaborate together and communicate together in terms of making sure that the end user's account and sessions are protected, which is a very difficult thing to do because unlike other specification, shared signal really its success depends on the collaboration between very different organizations. Some of them are platformers, some of them are security companies, some of them are SIAM companies, identity providers, and financial institutions or whatever. And they're from a variety of different fields, and they all have their business managers and lawyers. But when they do collaborate, they can share signals that matters and remediate and mitigate any kind of security breach. So we are planning an update to the CAPE and the risk specification, but I'm pretty sure that there are many other use cases and security signals that you may want to add on top of the secure webhook communication layer. We want to have more security events that is closer to say IoT device or more towards the cybersecurity area as well. So in order to get this going, this specification going, we've decided to do an interop event coming up in March in London. And to support that, we are gathering all these companies who want to participate to do a demonstration. This demonstration will be held at Gartner IM Summit in London in March. And to prepare that, we have created a interop specification as well as a set of tools to really try out your signal and see if it's working, such that by the time you meet your partners and start sharing these signals, you can be sure that it runs smoothly. My company, VeryCloud, did a interop demonstration at Identiverse about 2 years ago, and it worked really well. So I hope that there are going to be many companies that would participate in the interop activities we have. In terms of a developers event and international conferences, SFS is at most of these alongside with OpenID Foundation's activity, and we are planning to do a session at IIW as well as Identiverse. I've submitted a couple of ideas as well as a couple others from the group. We'll wait and see if we get approved. IEC is another conference in Berlin in June, which is very interesting for us. I think, we want to be present to many of these new geographics like Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, South America, and so on. Mainly because this sharing signal is quite often done in cross-border, quite often protecting the identity issued by the governments. And these activities, as long as people understand how to manage these privacy issues, I think they will do very well. Okay. So the industry has been doing quite a bit of work. Last year, Apple announced that they'll be supporting SSF and have the ability to connect using the Apple Business Manager to anybody who is going to support SSF signals. And Okta promptly announced their support for the Apple Business Manager using SSF. That was in June. Signal, which is based in Silicon Valley, announced their CAPE transmitter, a demo system and a developer system last June. Microsoft updated their technical documentation of their CAPE spec in the continuous access evaluation spec in the Entra ID in October. CISA and NSA put together a report on developers and vendors' challenges in the identity access management, which is extremely important because it pointed out the difficulty the industry was having on the multi-factor authentication rollout. And there are many challenges that need to be met by the industry, but I think this report gave a very clear indication that the government is very pro in terms of having a stronger authentication. I think SSF, pointed out by this report, is going to be the next step in terms of protecting digital identity. I think it's going to make sure that every single identity are monitored all the time, continuously, and mitigated automatically by the system instead of relying on all technologies and so that we have today. UK Digital Identity and Tribute Trust Framework came out, and we've submitted some recommendation to it. And the Shared Signal Guide, which was released by Cisco 2 years ago, is still very, very, it's my top of the list utility to understand the framework and work on it. Okay, so this has the entire update description of the ID2. But the most important part of the ID2 is, in fact, the multi-stream and complex subject matters. What we found when we did the original spec was that the actual people who were implementing these, like the companies such as Okta and Cisco, found that they really needed a multi-stream webhook mechanism in place because they have multi-tenanted, very complex users who would have multiple of devices, say online banking would use a phone to log in and monitor your account, but also you can do a lot of online banking on the PC, and that's 2 accounts for 1 person. This system, in order to create a SSF signal correctly, we needed to have a clearly defined multi-stream specification and a complex user ID, which we've worked with IETF in order to get this done. Okay, so interop event in March. I urge you to contact us if you like to participate in this event. We have a large room apparently where we can house 8 booths. And they can do demonstration, they can do meetings, and they can invite in a whole bunch of people from the main conference to this room in order to explain what we are doing. I think it's a great opportunity for the industry itself to interact with each other to make sure that what they have built is connectable across the board. So at the Gartner event, there's going to be a breakout session explaining the SSF. Our co-chair Atul will be speaking along with Gartner's analyst Eric Wormstone. I think one of the things which we'll find at this event is the fact that this as long as people start to collaborate, it can be rolled out very quickly, mainly because at the end of the day, okay, most of the platforms like Apple, Microsoft, and Google has internally created their own system in place. It's only a matter of connecting the dots. And if they see that there's enough momentum in the room, I think they will get things going in a large way. So please work with us. You're always welcome to attend our working group meetings every 2 weeks at the middle of the night for me, but it's pretty reasonable time in the US time zone. We are at a variety of events, so you can come and see me or see Tim or Atul and other members of the working group. We have a whole bunch of tools and documentations we can share with you and support your activities to make this happen. So please come and see me afterwards. I may have a drinking session after this meeting, and we can talk about SSF and anything else you'd like to do, like in Japan. Okay, thank you very much.
Before you go away. So just in case anyone has, I think we should take just a couple of minutes for comments because both David Brassard will step away in a moment and Tom. So let's start with Tom. And since we're in Japan, if you have questions in Japanese, I think that's fine. But any questions for Tom on shared signals?
Sorry. Sorry, I'm not Japanese. 途中から話を伺っていたので、もしかすると触れられてたかもしれないんですけど、まずその途中で少し出たプライバシー法に関する、取り組みっていうのがどのぐらい行われているのかというところをもしお伺いできればと思うのと、同じくなんですけれども、政府での、利用採用みたいなもののポテンシャル、今話があるかとか、もうすでに採用の可能性がありますみたいなところというのが、もしあったら教えていただければと思いました。
The question is to do with privacy and protection of people's data and digital identity, and also whether we are working closely with governments. Okay, so first question is privacy. This is all about protecting privacy. When we built the specification, we used JWT and all of the encryption technologies made available for the communication of these devices. But at the end of the day, two parties, transmitter and the receiver, has to come to an agreement saying that we won't be using these signals to breach privacy, and that it is only intended to use to protect the privacy of the people and not the other way around. So there's always going to be a business agreement within these organizations, and we want to make sure that that is enforced vigorously. The governments we are approaching as much as possible, but I'd be happy to talk to any governments because I can explain this in a government understandable format. 日本語で言った方がいいですか？大丈夫ですか？ Mike?
Mike Jones. I'll observe that legal agreements are, hard to create, one company to another one, but sometimes we get it done. For this thing to really scale, there's going to have to be trust frameworks where all the parties agree to a common set of terms, and therefore they don't have to have bilateral agreements between every participant. It becomes an n-squared problem and is truly intractable. Once upon a time, like about 8 years ago at the beginning of RISC, we did have a conference for lawyers where we had them try to think about what would appropriate trust frameworks for RISC be. And I think there were good ideas. It didn't turn into a trust framework that got adopted, but I'd be curious about your comments about how we solved the legal scalability problem.
Actually, I was going to go to the governments and tell them that if two parties are willing to service individuals with application or whatever, the privacy should be protected by the two parties as a standard, and that when they can clarify that. These activities, the communication of these states. I think it will be much easier for the lawyers and the businesses to say, the government has this guideline, and it should be okay with us to implement it. I think the government has a great role in play in getting this done, and I hope to be speaking to them.
I think Mr. Hain, Mark Hain, has been talking to the UK government about this very topic.
Well, not directly, but with my Open Identity Exchange hat on, which I spend a similar amount of time with as I do with the OpenID Foundation, there is a shared signals guide from them, but very much more with a trust framework focus on it. And also OIX has been involved in the influencing of UK government policy around the digital identity and attributes trust framework. One interesting facet of that is that they are expecting there to be a hub for signals to be passed through rather than it being established peer-to-peer, partly because it allows for better control of the data that's passed from each entity type to each other. So I think there's probably a couple of things we can follow up with you on there, Tom. Thank you.
And I'll add one more from the US perspective. Just before the break, holiday break, Christmas, New Year's break, there was a requested meeting from several departments of the US. So you mentioned, Tom, the NSA, CISA, and NIST report. And those three departments, along with FIDO and the OpenID Foundation, had a handful of board members and working group members who jointly participated in a conversation to say the standards are good, the standards do what they need to do, and that included shared signals. But the implementation of those standards is flawed and creating a porous attack surface. And so we have room to improve, and that's partly to do with the product design. I'm just recapping what I heard. And so there's going to be a subsequent working session with a very small group of people. And I think this could be another area where the US government decides to be more direct, and that could be through their vendor agreements, where they put more exacting requirements on their own vendors, or it could be through something stronger, through regulation, obviously. So I think it's an interesting time to see how that plays out, but certainly the OpenID Foundation and shared signals is a part of that conversation in the US. Any other questions for Tom? And let me point over to David, if he's still here, David Brossard. He dropped. Okay, we lost him. Should have gone there first. If anyone does have questions for David, happy to take them and we can connect you later. Auth-Zen questions? Yes. Okay, Mark is pointing out that David Brossard responds very quickly on Slack. So if you choose to be a part of the OpenID Foundation Slack, you can definitely find him there. All right, thank you again, Tom. All right, so I will I will now introduce myself, since I have not yet. It is my first time in Japan since I became the executive director of the OpenID Foundation. I have been here before, Kazuki, but it was not since 2005. It's been a long time. So it's my privilege to be back here, and I will be joined briefly by our new vice chair, recent vice chair of the OpenID Foundation, Dima Poznikov, who's going to talk about some of the strategic initiatives that the Strategic Task Force, and as of this morning, the board has confirmed their support for this year. But I thought I'd take us up a level. We kicked off with the last two sessions because, oops, sorry, going the wrong way. I thought I'd start with some good news, and then a few visionary comments, and then Dima will talk about the specifics for 2024. So what you see on the page is just a whole bunch of good news from what was delivered this past year. And it starts with the overall budget and financial position of the foundation is very healthy. We had several $100,000 of additional incremental revenue come in beyond what's expected going into the bank, which is great. And that's particularly driven by certification revenue through many of the countries we're supporting, including Brazil, where LCO is here, represented in the back, where we're working with Chicago Advisory Partners and the Brazilian Central Bank to support open banking and open finance, and now also open insurance in Brazil. We also have, where is that? Down at the bottom. 60 net new memberships of corporate entities that chose to take part in the foundation this year. We have many specifications that, I'll start up at the top, many specifications that have been moving through their due process. So FAPI 2, I think we're getting close, Nat, to being able to take it to final. I saw all of those little text edits come in for the last few weeks. So hopefully we can do a last push on those pull requests and get that closed. Similarly, Mark Hain on the EKYC, which we'll talk about shortly. Hopefully that's also moving to final very, very shortly. And OpenID for verifiable presentation and verifiable credential issuance have both been moving through the next stages of their drafts. Yeah, there's two of me. Very scary for everybody. And then that should be OpenID. Sorry, it didn't get corrected. OpenID Connect, which has had its errata passed, and now there's a submission going into ISO thanks to the work of Mike Jones most recently. A lot of certifications, hundreds of certifications, as I said, this past year, and it's almost 3,000 since the program started a few years back. We continue to have the great adoption of OpenID Connect, serving billions of users. And we were particularly delighted that over the last year or so that the EU and the Architectural Reference Framework named the OpenID for verifiable credential family of specs. And similarly, we have the California DMV has also selected those specs as part of their CA-DMV wallet. Shared signals we just talked about a few moments ago. We had several white papers that were launched in the last year. That's part of our effort to really lead the community and provide really plain English ways of describing what's happening with some of our key specifications and the marketplace as a whole. So one of those papers, Dima Poznikov lead edited on open banking and open data crossing borders. So thinking about use cases and mechanisms and standards to enable cross-border open banking and open data. Then there was two papers on digital identity credentials, one that skewed towards privacy and one that skewed towards the landscape as a whole, human-centric digital identity. And we timed that paper to coincide with the OECD announcement on recommendations for digital identity governance. And Nat also spoke on the panel when that was formally presented in September. And those two papers also served as input to the City Hub that I'll talk about in a few minutes. And then request for comment. We're supporting multiple governments at the moment with their due process on digital identity. That includes, active feedback from the Digital Credential Protocols Working Group, including Torsten, who's been going to be talking about some of the work in the DCP Working Group and the Architectural Reference Framework efforts there. As well as the UK government, like we just gave the example of shared signals and DIADF in the UK, the US with the CFPB and NIST, lots of comments going on there. And I think locally here in Japan, there's an ongoing conversation in OpenID Foundation Japan, and Nat personally are very close to that. So really very active trying to support lots of countries. So that's a busy year. It's been a good year. And then a few kind of big picture trends. So I'm testing out a hypothesis, and Deem and I were talking about this a little bit earlier this morning, is that in my mind, I still remember, I'm old enough, that there were even traveler's checks. You go to the bank and you get a traveler's check, and that was a big pain, right? Or you had to take out your cash, get cash, go through to the foreign exchange, change your cash. When I travel around the world now, including to Japan, I don't have a single yen in my bag. Right? I'm basically just expecting that it's going to work, that I can pay for things with my contactless card, with my mobile wallet, and basically that those transactions are going to be straightforward. Obviously, ACH and like money transfers is still a little bit more complicated, but for the average consumer, traveling around and purchasing things is way easier than it was 10, 20 years ago. But it took decades of process and standards to get to the point. And that had the benefit of a Visa or a MasterCard or a JCB, sitting in the middle of those networks and developing the rules and enforcing those rules and rolling them out across different countries. For digital identity, we don't have that, right? We have something analogous. We have passports. Passports have worked really well, 168 countries, but it's going through the UN. Right? They've taken that ownership. That also took decades to get to the point that now you just expect that your passport can be scanned, your chip can be read when you go from one jurisdiction to the other. But it doesn't work like that with my number card. It doesn't work like that if you've got your driving license. It doesn't work like that if you're trying to do an online transaction for all the reasons that we know. You can't have full transparency on who people are in a software code supply chain or a physical supply chain or any of the other transactions you might do in person or online. But it would be pretty amazing if it was as easy to assert your identity as it is to do payment transactions today, right? That's what we should, in Gail's mind, eventually be getting towards. So moving down that path, right now we're very focused on domestic implementations of digital identity, but what we are in the OpenID Foundation already anticipating is cross-border and how to make that better. Another big trend is open data everywhere. So we've seen with GDPR, the initial legislation that kicked off the open banking, open data revolution, and the UK had one of the earliest implementations, of course. And in the subsequent few years, we've seen Brazil, we've seen Australia, we've seen the US and Canada have deployments. Now it just continues to grow. In the first half of this year alone, we found out Colombia has incorporated regulation and is deploying there. We have the UAE also kicking off an initiative and planning to go live this calendar year. And I think other parts of Asia, some of countries I'm not even fully read in on, I think Thailand and the Philippines, and Nat, you said any country that's deploying MOSIP in Africa is likely to be enabling open data and sharing of transactions and payment transactions as well. So the move is really rapid on open data, and it's something which we as the foundation are well placed to continue to support with the FAPI family of specifications. Shared signals gaining favor. You just heard from Tom a whole story about what's happening, but from a macro picture, all of that growth in zero trust, cloud-based services is just a massive theme. And how can you address that very porous attack surface unless you've got something like shared signals? And I loved what Tom said about in-house within large corporations like an Apple, like a Google, or a large bank, there are signals that get shared already. But having a common way that you would share signals while being privacy preserving, to this excellent question, is critical, right? How are we going to function without having a good model for shared signals and one that could work across those private and public boundaries? It's certainly the beginning of the journey, but a very exciting prospect, and I think a critical prospect, one which I think when hearing that the NSA, which is the US National Security Administration, that they see the importance of this to the national security posture is really, to me, the right way to approach it, right? This is national security level issues, not just everyday bottom line, oopsies, we had a write-off. It's a big problem. And then this is really the superpower, right? The OpenID Foundation. I don't think when, you tell me, Nat and Mike, when the specs were first written, that you were thinking about the OpenID Foundation and its ability to be connecting not just a single ecosystem, but like ecosystems of ecosystems, which is the world that we're now looking into and we can see spreading out ahead of us. And we are the main player from a global standards perspective that can make that possible. So it's a very exciting time to be subject matter experts, to be contributing to the specifications, to be defining the requirements, thinking about the use cases that are going to not only serve within one's company or within one's country, but also across countries. And when you go across countries, then you're talking international trade, national security, really the welfare of our community. So it's a really, really exciting time. And the trees, by the way, is mycorrhizal networks. You know, how all the trees talk to each other and the fungus under the trees. It's amazing. So that's what I think we're like. It's those natural ecosystems. And with that, Dima, you want to take us through the roadmap for this year?
Thank you. It's my first time in Japan as well. So I'm pretty excited to be here. This is slightly different take on what Gail just presented. Can you hear me okay? Yes, that Gail just presented. OpenID Foundation Board set up strategic task force initiative that is looking to support its mission, OpenID Foundation mission. And there is a number of initiatives that strategic task force is trying to support. They are described on this page. And we classify them based on a level of maturity. From the most advanced and successful specifications being adopted on the right to emerging trends on the left. So I'll start from the right and supporting initiatives at the bottom. I'll start from the right. You obviously well aware of OpenID Connect and FAPI standards, and those standards not just mature, but they're highly successful and being adopted across the world, especially with FAPI-based ecosystems. Like Gail said, we see new ecosystems being adopted every year, 3, 4, 5, and long term, it it's probably not a surprise that most of the countries will have some sort of an open data regime, and more likely these open data regimes will be based on FAPI, from what we see. Crossing the chasm, it's focusing, or it's collecting, it's describing it's describing the working groups that getting to the point of mass scale, but not there yet. So eKYC, shared signals, those working groups which you will have separate updates on, or you already have on shared signals and events working group. So these are the ones that we see maturing very soon and being adopted widely very soon. Building the foundations, this is a step before the level, at the level of maturity. Digital Credentials Working Group working on verifiable credentials and supporting verifiable credentials and wallets build. GAIN POC Working Group is evolving into supporting cross-border initiatives around identity space, similar to the City Hub. And there is a number of initiatives that sort of been stood up and growing early. Moderna Working Group has been there for a while. Authorization Working Group has been set up relatively recently, but is quite active at the moment, and you've heard the update on that as well. Gail will give you an update on City Hub, which is focusing on cross-border digital identity. Similar goals as GAIN POC from a technical perspective, and we see those merging hopefully soon together. And there is a number of initiatives that we're monitoring at the moment. They're emerging things that potentially impact our standards, so we need to be aware of them. And potentially in the future, they will become separate streams, separate working groups. Apart from that, we have a number of supporting tasks, supporting programs like certification and security analysis program. These are especially these two are the key differentiators of the standards that OpenID Foundation provides. Certification program is super important for the implementers to be able to guarantee that the standards have been implemented correctly, the way they intended to. And the security analysis is very important for our specifications like FAPI and other ones that we're doing as well, to make sure that we're not introducing any new security vulnerabilities in the ecosystems that we support. The only other one I'll probably mention in listen and learn phase is ecosystem support community group. This is the one that I care specifically about. Over the last 10 years, OpenID Foundation has built a lot of mature standards, a lot of standards that are very well used. But what we realized that majority of the ecosystem, when you build an ecosystem, you need a lot more than just to use a technical standard. So what we're trying to do in ecosystem support community group is to template the activities that you need to stand up an ecosystem to make sure it's easier for ecosystem governing bodies like open banking, reserve banks, and open banking committees to set up new ecosystems from scratch, because a lot of them have to do that. So that's an update from me. Any questions?
Okay, it's quite confusing that I have to speak in English in Japan. Yeah, actually, my language mode cannot be switched to English. Okay, so let's get started. Hello, everyone. I'm Naohiro, chair of OpenID Foundation Japan. So today, I'd like to introduce a recent activity of OpenID Foundation Japan. And many of you, I guess, you know OpenID Foundation itself, but some of you doesn't know OpenID Foundation Japan itself. So I'd like to talk about OpenID Foundation Japan itself. Originally, OpenID Foundation Japan was established in 2008 to support the growth of the Open API ecosystem in Japan through promoting the OpenID related technology or specification. And our objective is to enable Japanese industries to develop secure and privacy-preserving digital identity environment. And we have many number of corporate members, including 6 corporate member and 46 member organizations from all over Japan. And let's me explain about overview of our activities. As well as OpenID Foundation itself, the OpenID Foundation Japan has local working groups. First one is the KYC working group is focusing on how to adopt IDA specs and Japanese laws. And translation of the education working group is focusing on translate emerging identity-related specification or guidelines into Japanese and educate Japanese developers on these specs. Also, we have global and local events. And as you know, of course, as you know, we have the OpenID Summit Tokyo tomorrow. And the summit is a global event which is held in Japan once in four years. And on the other hand, we also have local events 4 or 5 times per year. Some events are for business and other events for developers. And we have a relationship between the Japanese government and we are supporting them to collaborate and developing new guidelines with them and so on. So I'd like to explain one by one. First one is the local working group. One of the biggest working groups, the KYC working group, which Kosuke is leading now. There's over 30 active members in this working group, include representatives from the Japanese government and the Fight Alliance Japan work group through our relationship between these organizations. And the KYC working group is focusing on developing use case of identity assurance specs and the Japanese laws. These use cases are both for individuals and the legal entities. And in some cases, there are concrete Japanese laws such as anti-money laundering or some rules for telco industry. But as a case, there's many cases for industry which is not controlled by laws, but they need how to do their identity proofing or identity verification. So we are trying to publish some guideline for these cases. And as I mentioned earlier, we have some local events. This is one of the local events which KYC working group has organized. This time, they are focusing on their activity in Japan for business person. And also, there are some related work like FAPI or relationship between Japanese government. And there are many participants at that time. That's very awesome event at the time. And this is also this is a work of KYC working group. They published the digital identity verification guideline for private enterprises. This guideline was developed through collaboration with digital agency and Japanese expert. Well, there's I guess over 10 expert members from working group. And this guideline is mainly for private enterprise, which is not controlled by Japanese laws. As I mentioned, many of financial institutions like bank or telco operators is well controlled by laws in Japan as well as other countries, but some of the emerging industries like car sharing or talent offering are not controlled by specific law, but they, of course, they need do some identity verification, and it's quite important for their business. So this guideline was developed for them to learn about best practice of identity verification and kind of things. And in addition, the Japanese government has identity verification guideline for government services, and they are trying to update the guideline from last year to this year, I guess. And Nat and I are supporting them to update the guideline, referring this guideline also. So second working group is translation and education working group in Japan. And last year they translated NIST guideline into Japanese and have had an event to introduce NIST guideline to Japanese developer community. And in this year, OpenID Foundation Japan decided to divide this working group into two working groups. First one is a translation working group, as well as last year. They continue to translate recent specs or guidelines into Japanese. And also, second working group we are newly established is digital identity talent developing working group, which Takeshita is leading now. And the working group is focusing on talent development through education. I guess this almost same situation in other countries. The main biggest problem we have is lack of a number of experts in identity space. So we decided to cultivate experts through education in this working group. And this is also our hosted event last year. Yeah, this is focusing on translation for NIST guideline. And yeah, of course, you know, this is tomorrow. We have OpenID Summit in Tokyo at Shibuya. So we are pleased to host one of the biggest OpenID events in Japan. I'm looking forward to seeing you tomorrow as well. So yeah, in addition to the working group activities or events, we are continuing to support the Japanese government and sometimes also we are support academic industries. So we supporting for example, we supporting the cabinet secretary through joining their initiatives called Trusted Web. And also, we currently supporting digital agency, as I mentioned earlier, so helping them to develop a new identity verification guideline for government services. And in some case, we support a standardization organization called ZipDeck. This organization is one of the counterpart of the organization of ISO standard. And this organization, I think it's under umbrella of Ministry of Economic and Trade and the industry. And lastly, for academic support, some of university have interest on using verifiable credential for degrees or transcripts, and they have some work group there. So I'm joining the work group and discuss with them how to utilize OpenID specs regarding to verifiable credential in the academic space. Yeah, this is a final slide I show. This is about the Japanese government initiative called Trusted Web. I guess tomorrow the representative from Japanese government will show about the initiative in the Open Summit. But I introduce the activity in short. This initiative is following the concept of the FFT. It's a abbreviate of data free flow with trust. It's agreed between the G7 or G20 countries at the Congress. And this initiative itself is aimed to build a new trust framework in digital society and enable various parties to create new barriers. And this is actually this is the third year of this initiative, and I'm supporting to write some white paper with them, how to build the new trust through some, they say, tool itself is a technical stuff like our architecture itself and verifiable credential spec and so on. And also they have to define governance framework to make everything safer. So Nat and I are supporting them as well to proceed their initiative in the actual world itself. So anyway, as I mentioned earlier, the Japanese government is going to present about this initiative tomorrow. So I'm looking forward to see you there. So that's all. Thank you very much. Any questions? できれば日本語で。Okay.
You mentioned on the prior page the AXIS program for higher education, and it looked like it might be a verifiable credential effort that's being spun up. Could you just share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, AXIS itself is organized by maybe over 300 universities in Japan. And they are focusing on various areas of education, like research data consolidation or as well as security, network, and so on. And one of their main topic is about digital credential in education space. There might be some macro credential like degree. And there's also micro credential like transcript or something like that. And actually, Japanese government have issued some guideline. The university should digitalize credential itself. So they are considering to use some digital credential format like Open Badge or verifiable credential, but they are still learning about the technology itself right now. So we are supporting them to use verifiable credential and OpenID related specification onto them. Okay. So any other questions or comments? Okay. Thank you very much.
All right, well, thank you for being here this afternoon. I'm Mike Jones. I'm an independent consultant in the identity space as well as a OpenID board member. So I'm here to talk about the OpenID Connect working group. Most of you know of OpenID Connect or you wouldn't be here. You're all using it. Your friends and family are using it even though they don't know it. And we have a lot of final specifications, which is great. The OpenID for verifiable credential specs were incubated in the OpenID Connect working group. I'm getting feedback in Japanese. We're in the process of transferring those to the digital credentials protocols working group as we complete the IPR solidification of each of those. In particular, just this week, we've started the working group last call for the OpenID for verifiable credential issuance spec, which there's been a lot of review activity for and is in good shape. I encourage you to nonetheless participate in the working group last call, read it, give your feedback, and hopefully we will have an implementer's draft in something like 60 days.
いや、実はさっきまで話してたんですよ。
Can we turn that speaker off?
会議っていうのと友達かどうか確認してくれるか？いや、多分ですけど、アンブレラの人にちょうど今、ちょっと誘拐されたのを取り出す目の上で。バチバチな感じですか、結構。バチバチっていうか、
Okay. While we have a bunch of final specs, we also have a number of specifications under development. There's the OpenID Federation spec, which Taka and others in the room have been contributors to. There's the OpenID for verifiable credentials specs family. There's a user info verifiable credentials spec. There's claims aggregation, and there's the native SSO for mobile apps. Next. Does this work? Nope. Okay. So there has been a lot of progress since we last met our heroes at a workshop in October. I already mentioned we're in the working group last call for OpenID for VCI. We published multiple OpenID Connect Federation drafts, actually now just OpenID Federation, and we're working towards the final implementers draft. We did the fairly substantial work as a working group of addressing all of the submitted errata issues for OpenID Connect, which have accumulated since February 2014, almost 10 years ago. There were, I believe, 83 different issues that we worked through as a working group in such a way that we didn't change the meaning of the spec, but we tried to make it as clear as possible. Those drafts were published on December 15th last year. And we not only wanted to do that for the health of the ecosystem and developers having great specs, but those are the basis for a submission to the International Standards Organization, ISO, for what's called publicly available specification status, which is a program where ISO will take specifications developed in standards bodies other than ISO and republish them as ISO specifications without changes, but giving them an ISO number. Why does this matter? There are jurisdictions around the world that have legal requirements to use specifications from international treaty organization standards, that being ISO and ITU primarily, in preference to all others. And so there's a presumption that you must use an ISO or an ITU spec if one is available that meets your business needs. And there's parts of the world where having the OpenID Connect family of specifications also be ISO specifications will measurably improve the ability for them to be adopted in those countries. So thank you all for helping with that. So what challenges and opportunities are we facing? Well, OpenID Federation is getting deployed. There's not one, but two national federations in Italy. There's a proof of concept deployment in Sweden. And you will hear about Federation tomorrow from our guest from Italy. There's possible deployments in Nordic countries. So there's a lot going on. A bunch of us are going to meet in Copenhagen in a week and a half and continue that work. There's lots of relationships with digital wallet initiatives and national identity systems worldwide. I mean, just at lunch, I think Nat was talking about how many different national ID systems use OpenID Connect at this point. I know there's the Czech Republic, France, Chile. Talk with Nat. We've not written this down. Maybe we should. We have in front of us to finish implementer's draft for all the OpenID for VC specs so that we can transfer them in an IPR clean way to the new DCP working group. Okay, here's an aspirational roadmap of some of the things that we should be doing. In this quarter, we plan to publish what we believe will be the last implementer's draft of OpenID Federation. We will have this quarter an implementer's draft of OpenID for VCI. In the second quarter, and Torsten can nod or tell me I'm crazy, I hope that we can get implementer's draft of the other OpenID for VC specs within this coming 6 months and finish transferring those to the new working group. And ideally, sometime in the second half of the year, we'll finish the Federation spec. And we're kind of doing a dance, the same dance that we did 10 years ago with OpenID Connect. There's pressure to make something final because there's parties that won't adopt it until it's final. On the same time, the more deployments you get, the more great feedback you get from developers and from deployers saying, you know, what if this is working for you? What isn't working? What's confusing? And that developer and deployer feedback is priceless. And so we're in this virtuous cycle now with Federation, and many of you are participating. So thank you very much. And again, Amir will talk about some of this tomorrow. At this point, I will stop and take any feedback or questions about what you would like us to be doing during the time in Japan and going forward. Finish the entire year tomorrow. Okay. With that, I will turn it over to the famous Marquine.
Sure. Thank you very much, Mike. I'm really loving the analogy of a dance in getting to the final specification. I might refer back to that in a minute. So I'm Mark Hain, co-chair of the eKYC and Identity Assurance Working Group. We have had, in some ways, a very powerful year, in some ways, kind of a boring year. We've been focusing quite hard on getting the spec to a point that it's ready to finalize. So the objective of the working group, as stated here, is to extend OpenID Connect into the realm of a much more rich and explicit set of metadata about identity assurance. So the pieces of evidence that may have been used in proving the identity of the person involved, the processes that may have been used to verify those pieces of evidence or validate that the evidence is linked to the end user, and the relationship between those processes and the evidence are all the sorts of things that can be optionally included in an identity assurance payload. In terms of where we are at the moment, from a publication perspective, we have an implementer's draft 4 for a document called OpenID Connect for Identity Assurance. That was actually achieved back in 2022. And we had submitted the JOC Claims Registry request over to IANA successfully. And since the last workshop, not in April, in September was that? I think it was. October, thank you, Mike. We took the decision to modularize the specification. Dima in particular gave us feedback, although we had similar messages from other implementers that the spec as it stood at implementers draft 4 had too many features in it, and we could really make it simpler to read and easier to use by splitting it up into several documents. So that's been quite a large effort, more effort than I expected. So it has been split, and we've actually, as of, I think, the first meeting this year, which was the 10th of January, have now got all of the documents split out into separate components. We've got the OpenID Connect for Identity Assurance document now had quite a number of sections removed into other documents. The main and the biggest one of those is the schema definition document. And that is a normative dependency for OpenID Connect for Identity Assurance. The main reason for splitting that one out was so that the schema definition for identity assurance could be used not only within the context of OpenID Connect, but also in the context of verifiable credentials and in any other API. And then the third component that we're going to be taking to final very shortly is the updated, although very small update. Really, the update is it's a separate document, claims registration to IANA for the additional identity assurance JOC claims that have been created. And that's going to be going forward. The only thing we have left to do now is, I think it's on the next slide actually, is to do a bit of reformatting and editorial work to make it easier for these documents to be submitted to ISO as a pass document so that they can be more easily adopted by implementers in certain parts of the world. Other documents that have come out of the main identity assurance document are one relating to attachments. We're going to move that one forward independently, so not in sync with the first 3 documents. That one was created so that we could have things like the image of a driving license or the image of a passport integrated into the identity assurance metadata. There's a transaction-specific purpose document that Dima has written up And that's going to be, and I think you've started the process, Dima, of putting that over into IETF, because you've not started, you've written the document. Yeah, okay. But that's going to be given over to working group in IETF, because we think it's most appropriate to be actually located there. And then the transaction claim document has also been created now. That's really just another claim being registered into the IANA claims registry. In terms of external achievements, the OIX in particular has been very supportive of our work and has, as part of a report that they issued earlier, recommended that this is the basis of a future reusable identity standard for many other cases and potentially across protocols as well. Oh, and I think that's the end of it. Before we move on though, two things. I do want to call out some particular contributors who've been really active in the last year. Dima in particular, both as an implementer and as a spec author, has been really important to me as a co-chair of the working group. Taka and the Athlete guys involved in implementing and making sure that what we're doing is actually realizable in code. And the support for the spec going forward is awesome. Yep, thank you. And it's been extremely pleasing to hear of the projects that are moving forward and intending to use the identity assurance family of specifications, not least the community in OpenID Foundation Japan and the Japanese government. So I'm really looking forward to the meeting that we have on Monday with the Japanese government, meetings we have on Monday with the Japanese government to discuss the use of the identity assurance spec, and the other specs that we still have in relatively early draft in the working group, in particular the OpenID Connect for Authority spec. And I think that's probably enough on that front. Actually, one other person I'd like to offer a thank you to is Hidari McLean. He's not here. I don't think he's online. And Capital One. He's been doing some fantastic editorial work on sorting out, just making sure the document's ready. Gail. Oh, yes, and Kazuki, who's been instrumental in promoting the use of the spec over here in Japan. So, any questions? Okay, well, thank you very much. I believe I'm handing over to Bjorn, am I? Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark.
This is Bjorn. Can you guys hear me?
Yep, and I'll drive slides for you since you're presenting virtually. Thank you.
Fantastic. Okay, so this is the Moderna working group overview. And so the objective of the working group is to support mobile network operators community in their role in the identity ecosystem by developing technical standards to enable MNOs to become identity providers whilst exposing applicable APIs. And the one group has worked on OpenID Connect profile to achieve this, as well as extensions to OpenID Connect for MNOs. So in terms of specifications, we have the CVAC core specification in final status. We have 3 in implementers draft status, the Moderna authentication profile, the account porting profile, and the user question API specification. And the current specification under development is the Moderna CBAC profile. So the CBAC core profile is it's a specification with multiple options, and it was developed to allow specific use cases to create profiles of the specification for the use case. So there's a FAPI CBA profile, and the Moderna CBA profile addresses the MNO, the Moderna perspective or use cases for the CBA specification. In addition to that, there is a Moderna discovery profile and a Moderna registration profile. Besides that, we're working on a CBA core errata based on some issue tracker topics, as well as a CBA core extension based on other use cases from other working groups. Next slide. So the working group's progress and opportunities. So again, as mentioned, we're working on an errata to the CBA specification as well as an extension. As part of the CBA core, there was also a need for a IANA registration of CBA endpoints. And besides that, the working group is working on a mission critical services profile. So within the third generation partnership project, there is a use of OpenID Connect for mission critical services, which is first responders or any kind of emergency type of services. And they use OpenID Connect to authenticate a user, a first responder, in order to get priority access to the network. And this was done outside of the OpenID Foundation. And we're working on bringing this into the foundation and allow the foundation to maintain their profile on behalf of the DPP. In addition to that, there is also within GSMA the use of OpenID Connect to verify RCS use cases, not only for users, but also for chatbots. In terms of outreach, the working group has a liaison agreement with Etsy. This was initially done to facilitate the wallet or SIOP work within the Connect working group. But Etsy is working on multiple telecom related areas. So that's one of the outreaches by the Moderna working group. Another one is the Camara project. The Camara project is a Linux Foundation project working on defining APIs for telcos to be exposed to third parties. And so we have a liaison agreement with this organization, and it applies to obviously more working groups than Moderna. It is a MNO driven project, but again, some of the use cases applies to BAPI. It applies to the eKYC IDA working group. And so we've had an BAPI overview presentation to the Identity and Consent Management Special Project. And we're working on a overview of the eKYC IDA working group to the Know Your Customer specific project. Finally, we are working to establish a formal relationship with GSMA. Throughout the life of Moderna, GSMA has been actively involved since the Mobile Connect development. But after that did not continue, GSMA has not been actively involved in the foundation. And so we're working on a formal relationship with GSMA to have access to
Thanks, Bjorn. Any questions for Bjorn before we let him drop off? It's pretty late in the evening for him.
No, it's not that late. But...
Any questions? Very good. Thank you, Bjorn. We really appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Thorsten Lodderstedt. I work with the German Federal Agency for Disruptive Innovation, and also helping the OpenID Foundation as a technical advisor. And I'm here in my capacity as one of the co-chairs of the Digital Credentials Protocols Working Group. And I'm going to explain you in more detail what we do in the working group, what the current status is, and what the next steps will be. Let's first talk about the scope of the working group. So the working group was established to work on all the protocols that we are doing in the space of decentralized identity, the three-party model. There are different ways to call it. And the spec family consists of a couple of different specs. So first of all, in the three-party model, we have obviously two different interfaces between the wallet and the issuer on one side, and the wallet on the verifier on the other side. And so we have two different protocols for issuing and presenting credentials, most namely OpenID for verifiable credential issuance and OpenID for verifiable presentations. And you might have noticed there is no connect in the name, right? So this is a new kind of OpenID, right? It builds on the same principles of OpenID Connect, but it is a different kind of protocol that sits on top of OAuth, but is optimized for issuing and presenting verifiable credentials of different sorts. So the protocol itself is credential format agnostic. It can be used with all sorts of credentials, which is a very powerful feature and which helped us to really gain traction in the market. It is also a challenge because a protocol that can be combined with various different data formats also is a framework. So it can't directly be instantiated and executed, which, for example, also makes it much harder to write conformance tests for it, as Joseph might be able to confirm. But nevertheless, it's a powerful feature. It will allow to build systems that are interoperable or at least compatible on the protocol level. And there are additionally profiles that combine the protocol with different credential formats. In the lower part of the presentation, you see one of those profiles, which is the high assurance interoperability profile of OpenID for VC with SD.VC. So this is one concrete profile that instantiates the protocols with SD.VC. And there's another one or another set of profiles, which is specified in the ISO spec family in ISO 18013 and ISO 23220 spec family, which defines how OpenID for VC can be used in conjunction with MDoc, right? And then we have a couple of other specifications. We have the self-issued OPv2, which is used for pseudonymous authentication using key material managed in the wallet. So this is not coupled to any kind of credentials. This is just about authentication. And we've got OpenID for verified presentations over Bluetooth Low Energy, which opens a new capability. With that protocol, one can present credentials in proximity, in person, through a Bluetooth Low Energy channel. And that's very important because the new quality of verifiable credentials is that they can be used in all kinds of situations or places, not necessarily only online. Once you have digital credentials in your pocket, you might also want to use them in physical situations. I mean, most people these days, for example, use the smartphone to pay, right? So they have their credit card virtualized on the phone. And that's basically the same kind of use case we want to enable with OpenID for Bluetooth Low Energy. And then there's the last document, which is the security and trust model, which is of utmost importance because in the end, since we have a split between the different interfaces, we need to make sure that the security is ensured over the whole life cycle of a credential, from the issuance through the storage in the wallet to the presentation of the credential in a certain situation. And that's why because that is not tied to one of the protocols, but the whole family, we have split that out into a separate document that we maintain in the working group. You might notice the frames of those rectangles are different, and that shall give you an indication in which working group the specs lives right now. We are in transition phase. So the work initially started in the OpenID Connect working group as a special SIOP call. And as we are now transitioning into the new working group, we need to be careful to transition the documents while preserving the IPR. And that's why we right now have the three documents, Bluetooth Low Energy, the security trust model, and HYPE already in the TCP working group. And the core specs are still within the Connect working group. And as we are going forward, and Mike already mentioned that, we will do implementers draft calls for all the three specs. And once we have concluded them, we will move the spec over into the DCP working group. What have we achieved? So first of all, we have the new working group. And the hope that the new working group as a dedicated place to work on these specifications would attract new attendees turned out to be, or became reality. Yeah, we have a lot of new people attending, and also that has become member of the foundation that are attending our working group calls. So on average, our calls have, I would say, 15 attendees, which is really amazing. And all of them are very passionate, very opinionated, very experienced, which is exactly the kind of attendees that we need to evolve the specifications. And we also have moved to GitHub. And that works well for us, especially as working group chairs. So we now have one GitHub repository per specifications with all the issues and pull requests that belong to this specification, and also have set up automatic build mechanisms to automatically build the editor's draft of all those specifications, and that works very well. Okay, what do we have achieved on top of that? So first of all, we have the first set of conformance tests, thanks to the work of the conformance test team for an OpenID for VP baseline in conjunction with SD.VC. So we're heading for HYPE compliance, but it takes some time to implement all that stuff. So we have that baseline right now, and it has already been run with a couple of wallets. I think we are on a good way there. I also already mentioned the profile for using OpenID with MDoc, and there was a test event conducted by Spruce ID, and I think there was also another test in Paris recently, and they tested this profile of OpenID for VC, and a formal security analysis of the protocol was completed. And since I see Ned, that reminds me on one question he asked when we presented a early revision of OpenID for VC at IRW. I think it's a year back or so. And Ned asked, hey, have you already conducted a formal security analysis? And I was thinking, hey, we just started to work on that protocol stuff. Is that becoming the new standard that we do a formal analysis? Yes, it is. And now we have that security analysis, and I think there is a blog post put online in the next day where you can find more information. Baseline is for the same device interactions, the protocol security properties hold. For the cross-device, there's always a challenge, right? Cross-device is something where you need to accept that you can't prevent all kinds of phishing attacks, at least not automatically or technically with the current state of the art. That's also was confirmed again by the security analysis. We also very successfully have supported a couple of government initiatives. Gail already mentioned some of them. I'm very much involved with the work on eIDAS. I also will give a presentation about that tomorrow on at the summit. And we helped what's called the expert group. So that's the group of member state representatives of the European Union that built the technical framework for the European Digital Identity Wallet to use our set of technologies in the right way, right? The working group has adopted the HYPE profile. That is a recent event. So it was a individual draft before. Now it's really has been adopted by the working group and is maintained by the working group going forward. And what is of utmost important, we have incorporated almost all implementer feedback. Taka, correct me if I'm wrong. For the OpenID for VCI specification. So I have to say, I mean, we have been working for, I would say, 3 years now on OpenID for VCI, and we never managed to get to an implementer's draft. And it's not because we did not want to, it's because every time we wanted to close the door, someone walked in and said, hey, there is one feature missing to make me happy. And so since we take all the implementers' feedback very serious, we worked very hard to incorporate even very sophisticated feature requests and also try to keep the protocol as simple as possible, because that's one of the most important principle. Keep simple things simple and make complex things possible. I hope you will like it. Please review it, give us feedback. On the implementation side, it's really amazing to say how much traction OpenID for VC has in the market. So I just want to briefly mention a couple of implementations. So 2 areas frameworks that previously only supported DITCOM now also have adopted OpenID VCI, which is the Areas JavaScript framework, and the .NET Wallet framework, which was previously called Areas.NET framework. The European Commission has funded the implementation of a reference wallet application that can be used by different member states to implement a European Digital Identity Wallet that also implements OpenID for VC. Bundesdruckerei, which is the German federal printing house, though they produce the ID cards and sort, they have implemented OpenID. There are a couple of others, including the Italian government. And I just yesterday learned that Gaia X, which is a huge project, it's a French-German corporation for building an independent kind of cloud platform. They're also in the project of implementing OpenID for VP. So it seems OpenID for VC is getting commodity, right? The thing to do. And we have an increasing number of open source projects. I just list a couple of them. And we have a good cooperation with OpenID Foundation around that. So there is a task force on OpenID for VC due diligence that aims at facilitating people to implement OpenID for VC, bring that source code, also make it open source. bring it to Open Wallet Foundation, but also working on implementation profiles. Because without profiles, there is no real true adoption and interoperability. Yeah, and again, a lot of implementers feedback, which is great. Next steps. Mike already mentioned it. We are aiming at entering the implementers draft process for the OpenID for VCI specification. And once we have entered that process, we would like to focus on a couple of topics in the OpenID for BP space and the hype specification to get them sorted out. And yeah, also enter another implementers draft for OpenID for BP. Obviously, that is really needed. We are not done yet with OpenID for VCI. We decided, nevertheless, to start implementers draft because we want to enclose the IPR or have the IPR protection and also give implementers a baseline for their implementation. We have one big topic in front of us, which is better support for full lifecycle management for unlinkable credentials. This is about batch issuance of credentials. This is about revocation of credentials, which is a very, very complex topic. And we decided to first of all do the ID and then enter that space and first of all have a discussion how we're going to solve that, which is very important to build truly privacy preserving wallets. And there are people out there in industry that believe issuance can't be standardized. There are huge companies believing in that, and we would like to prove them false. Because if you don't standardize issuance, you get locked in, especially as an issuer, because you build bespoke integrations with wallet, and that's not good for a prospering ecosystem of verified credentials. Right, we will continue support the IDAS regulation. We will continue support the NIST project, and we will also contribute to the discussion that's going on right now at W3C on defining a new kind of browser API that shall be usable for, I don't know yet. So I think most people believe there is only a need for a browser API for presentation. I personally think if there will be a browser API, it must cover issuance and presentation for the reasons I just mentioned. So that will be a very interesting discussion going forward, for which we didn't have the resources yet, but we believe now we can start to contribute there. Yeah, and with that, I'm done with my presentation. Are there any questions?
One of the things that was terrible about the InfoCard user experience is you could get to a position where your relying party was asking for a card, but you didn't have anywhere to get it. You couldn't do dynamic issuance. Talk about the structure of the systems we're going to have to build and deploy so that that failure mode doesn't repeat itself.
So thanks for the question. First of all, OpenID for VCI was always or was designed from the ground with the idea that on-demand issuance of credential must be possible. That's also based on the experience that users do not prepare. They do not set up something in advance and then enter a use case and are perfectly set for that. So that's why we have built into it mechanisms that if a presentation request comes into the wallet and it can't be fulfilled, then if all the metadata are available, which is out of scope of the specification right now, so if the wallet is able to determine where to get such a credential, it can turn around and just start a issuance process using the authorization code flow. So that's absolutely possible from a technical standpoint. Next question.
First, a quick comment. I always like to tease that the California DMV implementation isn't up there. So their vendor Spruce, at least on the prior page, is on the page, but California DMV is also implementing to the OpenID for verifiable credential suites, and they're planning to test the tests as soon as Joseph finishes the MDoc version. So, but aside from that point, I also wanted to ask, interop tests have been done through ISO on at least the MDoc piece. What do you think good might look like in terms of any other interoperability events this year? Since there's so many implementations, we think the Japanese government is coming along doing some, possibly some work here as well, and they're funding the test suite development here in Japan. And then of course there's US, there's EU, there's lots of things going on. Do we need anything beyond ISO in terms of interop events, particularly to engage relying parties?
So first, I would say ISO and OpenID Foundation follow completely different cultures when it comes to testing. ISO follows we all sit together, plug things together, and try to make it work philosophy. I think OpenID Foundation has done that in the past. Before we start. Yeah, okay. So since we have started the certification kind of thing, everyone can test compatibility with the specification on her or his own. So there's basically, from a technical standpoint, no need to have that plug fests, let's call it that way. But there's also a social and I would say marketing aspect of that sitting, gathering together and testing things. So I think we should do that. Again, we should not rely on that for really quality assurance and interoperability, but I think it would make sense to bring implementers together to test implementations with each other. Perhaps. Yeah. Yeah. Something like that. Yeah. So I like the idea, even though I have to admit, I don't know who has the capacity to really prepare and conduct such a workshop. Yeah. But I like the idea.
Thank you very much. That's very, that was very interesting. I've got a lot of questions, but I'll keep it just one. Is there any work on the wallet certification and wallet registration towards the issuer?
So on the protocol side, we have worked quite intensively and extensively on making sure there are the rails that allow wallets and issuer to establish a trust relationship, even in complex ecosystems. So in an ecosystem where, speaking in OAuth terminology, no client would go and register manually with each potential AS. So there could be 10,000s of issuers, right? So the idea is that this is happening through trusted third parties. And there is a mechanism called wallet attestation that is right now part of the hype profile. We are considering that to push it up the stack into the VCI spec. So this mechanism exists, and it is heavily discussed and prototyped and tested in the IDA space right now, which is one of the biggest regulated schemes in that space. So that's the technical answer to that, right? Certification, I don't know what certification means in that context. If it is regulatory certification, which is the semantics of that term in the IDAS context, that's out of scope for us right now, right? I mean, there is work going on, for example, in the European Union. There is a subgroup even of the expert group covering certification. And in the German project, we will also have a certification profile, so requirements that needs to be fulfilled by a wallet in order to be recognized as a true European digital identity wallet. And from a technical standpoint, that might result in the issuance of a JOT or a certificate that then the wallet provider can use to make sure the issuer gets the right information. So that's the current situation. Does it answer the question? Okay, cool.
Oh, I was just reflecting that I've been at demo tables at the Internet Identity Workshop some months ago where there was software being demonstrated from 4 or 6 different vendors playing different roles that did interoperate with each other. Now, presumably they got together in advance and, connected things up and verified that it would work. But that is a form of this sort of ad hoc get together interop testing, which is sometimes valuable to the developers.
I mean, there are existing communities that do interop testing. So there was one group of people, for example, from Microsoft and other companies that demonstrated stuff that worked together. There was another group from the ID Union project, one of the projects where all this has been started. And so they have tested interoperability before they came to IW. And it was more to demonstrate here it works, right? I think what Gail has in mind is yeah, one, I would say, a bit bigger. But it also brings me to another topic that I would highlight. Do we have a presentation about GAIN today? Okay, but let me just mention that. So there is the GAIN community group at OpenID Foundation. And we have done interoperability testing across identity networks with OpenID Connect and OpenID Federation. And now for the next stage, we are planning to do the same kind of testing for VC-based ecosystems based on OpenID for VC. So this is also a place, and I should have mentioned that before. Yeah, so that is a place where we have defined a profile of OpenID for VC that all the parties agreed upon. And now we're implementing it and plug all those people together. And so it's not an event, it's more a standing test bed where people can join. And Taka is doing a lot of work in that space. So thanks a lot for that. And other companies as well. Bundesdruckerei is also involved, and the Italians are involved, and so on. So I think that will be more kind of a standing test bed going forward, at least for the hype-related profiles.
Thank you for your presentation. And I'd like to ask you about wallet. What do you think about needs for wallet? Because everyone wants wallet. Everyone says wallet in this model, and there's many implementations of wallet right now. But as Nat mentioned earlier, there might be some certification or interoperability test is required. But I'm always curious about, is it really required? Really, we want wallet because we already have browsers. In some case, wallet is useful, but in some case, not useful for us.
Those are two very big questions. First of all, do we need wallets? I think so. But in contrast to what the early proponents of self-sovereign identity claimed, this is not about replacing federated identity. So federated identity works well for the web SSO use cases. And it's simple and it's secure. That, in my opinion, is not the purpose or not the aim of wallets. If I think wallets, I'm thinking about digitizing a whole society and making things digital that today are plastic or paper, right? So I'm thinking about ID cards, yeah, driver's licenses, vaccination certificates, diplomas, all sorts of attestations. And this is way beyond identity. From my perspective, it's not even identity. It's just authoritative data that I have in my pocket, right? That's what I need a wallet for. And that's why I also need regulation in that space. Because just think about putting health records, prescriptions, and all that stuff in a wallet where you don't know whether you can trust the wallet provider, right? I mean, the wallet in the end is a very security sensitive component. If you're thinking about binding the credential to a device in order to prevent impersonation and duplication, the issuer needs to make sure it's talking to a wallet that has all those capabilities, right? So you can use platform attestation for that if you want, or you rely on a regulatory scheme that makes sure the security features are tested and are certified according to certain requirements, and also the privacy features, right? Support for selective disclosure and all that stuff. And that's why I think there are use cases where I don't need certification, but this is mostly the use cases I'm not very interested in, right? So I'm thinking about the really sensitive use cases where you're really managing very sensitive data, where you want to make sure they are secure on the privacy. Yeah. So in Germany, our objective for the wallet project is to build the most trustworthy wallet infrastructure we can think of.
Thank you for your answer. I think that one of our goal is to implement wallet into browsers, because using wallet application in smartphone, yeah, we already have browser in smartphone. So if the browser support wallet capability, it's one of the goal, I guess.
Do you want to use your wallet in conjunction with apps as well? Do you want to use your wallet when accessing apps on your smartphone as well, or only when browsing websites? So that to me suggests that the wallet should be a functionality that is able to support both cases. So there needs to be a link into the browser, but that's not the only channel, right? That's why I'm also arguing that approaches like Choppy that is being pursued at the W3C is a bit too narrow, because that is an API that works in the browser, but it does not work from an app to the wallet. So I'm looking for a solution where the wallet can be used in both situations, which to me suggests there needs to be a link, a gateway from the browser to the app. And I'm hoping that the work on the browser API will provide us with an even better link than we have today. The link today is a custom scheme or a claimed URL. Claimed URL is okay. Custom scheme is crap. So we need something better to have a smooth user experience from the wallet, from the app, and also from the browser. Does that answer your question? Cool.
A bit more of a comment than I think a question, although you might make comments, Torsten. Talking same point around the wallets and the YCG group. I was thinking as you spoke, Nihiro, that might be how a browser would talk about it. Why not us, right? We can do everything. We're at the browsers. And I think historically they thought that might be true, but the power dynamic is shifting because of some of the reasons that Torsten explained, but also from an issuing perspective, if you have governments acting as issuers now, and then the government would need to be trusting that the wallet is going to have that security down to the device. And you've got the wallet layer and the device layer, and there's a lot of complexity. So the distance with the wallet plays a crucial role. But more to the point of the browser API and YCG, I think the aspiration of some of the browser providers was that the browser API would solve the task, but in the kind of balance of powers between the ISO working group, the W3C, and then the OpenID Foundation, there's even the possibility that instead of contributing to the browser API, they will also be contributing to the OpenID Foundation, which would be interesting. And part of that is because the specs have been adopted in the architectural reference framework in the EU. And the browser API has not been named in that specification. So great work by Torsten and others to get it, these specs in the architectural reference framework.
Thank you. But there are a lot of other people involved, and a couple of them are also in the room. So thank you very much. Okay, then I think we're done.
All right, so I guess we are running behind the schedule, so I'll try to be quick. I and Michaelis is going to talk about FAPI and the ecosystem a little bit, but before getting into it, how many of you actually have heard about FAPI? All right, it's pretty much everybody. So I really don't have to explain, but FAPI is a high security profile for OpenID Connect and and OAuth. And it's being adopted quite widely right now in 11 countries or something like that. And there are a couple features of the FAPI, which is extensive use of formal verification. Actually, all the published specifications have undergone the formal verification, formal security verification. And we are closely collaborating with national regulators and associations. And also, our way of writing the spec is trying to be ISO directive compliant so that it's going to be easier to actually translate into each other language. For example, in the case of IETF, we extensively used the capitalization, right? That doesn't translate into the languages which doesn't have the concept of the capitalization. So we are actually using the restricted set of English, so to speak. And then we do have national level certifications in countries like Brazil and so on and so forth. And we have 3 final published specifications. That's FAPI 1 series. And we've got a bunch of implementers draft. That's primarily FAPI 2.0 series document. And for FAPI 1, we have FAPI Security Profile Baseline and FAPI Security Profile Advanced. Advanced is built on Baseline, but to my knowledge, all the deployments are actually using, well, at least at the national level, they're using Advanced. And with the developer feedback and experience from the jurisdictions, we are creating FAPI 2.0, which is more streamlined and which has more features. And we have FAPI SIBA, FAPI security profiles and TACA model, and FAPI 2.0 message signing and grant management. In conjunction with that, we have, especially DEMA has been really, taking lead on this one, but we've been publishing white papers. Also, with the help of Australian government and with the collaboration with the University of Stuttgart, we've been doing the formal security analysis. And certification, I think we are going to touch upon certification later. So I'm going to let Joseph speak about that later, right? So that I can kind of skip it to save the time a little bit. All right, so working group roadmap. In Q4 2023, we have finished formal verification of FAPI 2.0 message signing, DCR, and dynamic client registration, SIBA. And we have also published the second implementers draft of message signing. And in this quarter, it's in the aspiration column, but we want to bring the FAPI 2.0 specs to the final. It might be a little bit challenging because at the last moment, as usual, people start implementing it and come back with their feedback, right? So we get technical heavy questions every week these days. So we've been spending. So last night we were having a FAPI call from 11 p.m., but we were spending like 50 minutes of the time in one of the new questions like TLS everywhere problems. MTLS everywhere problems and things like that. We have to answer those. So the it can be challenging to finish final because given that the final requires a 60 days public review period, but we'll try, right? Maybe it's going to be in Q2, realistically. Well, anyways, I still have not given up the hope. And here's Mike Less on the ecosystem engagement.
Thanks, Nat. I'm just going to hit a couple highlights on the next couple slides to help us get back on track a little bit time-wise. So we saw this graphic at the beginning of Nat's presentation on the FAPI working group update. And Gail's touched upon some of this earlier on in the workshop, but just to talk a little bit about the FAPI landscape update, OBI in the UK requires their CMA 9 to recertify annually. They have a local profile, and we currently have 64 OPs certified in the UK. I'll just touch briefly upon Brazil because we'll have LCO taking a deeper dive into Brazil after I'm finished up here. They also have a local profile. Also is a board member of the OpenID Foundation. They have led the way, really, in mandating FAPI certification and recertification, both with OPs and RPs. And there's, I think, over 500, well over 500 Open Finance Brazil certifications. We're also working with Open Insurance Brazil as well, and they're taking Open Finance's lead. They've mandated FAPI certification and recertification, and their ecosystem's a little bit smaller, So we have just shy of 50 OP certs and about 45 RP entities certified. CDR with, now we're getting into Australia. There's two engagements within Australia with the CDR, the consumer data rights, selected FAPI 1.0 with plans to move to FAPI 2. They've been a great partner to the foundation in helping co-fund the security analysis of FAPI 2 baseline done by the University of Stuttgart. And FAPI message signing and CEBA completed, waiting FAPI working group feedback. And then we had Dima Postnikov that presented earlier from Connect ID. They have a private ecosystem, and they've provided some directed funding to the OpenID Foundation that we're very fortunate to have to help continue the development of the FAPI 2.0 certification conformance test. And we have a couple OPs and RPs certified to FAPI 2.0, so we're very happy about that. We've also been working with the SAMA group in Saudi Arabia. They adopted FAPI 1.0 advanced with plans to migrate to FAPI 2. So the first phase in SAMA was to get the largest banks certified. So we currently have 17 OPs and 12 RPs certified. And again, once they transition to FAPI 2.0, we anticipate a significant uplift of certifications in Saudi Arabia. Open Banking Canada, the foundation has been fortunate to be able to meet with and provide guidance to those leading the initiatives in Canada. They're going to take the lead of FDX, and FDX has selected FAPI 1.0. They'll be publishing a report in the very near future, and they or continuing to talk about within the FDX context discussions on how to combine certification. And we're working also closely with FDX in that regard. Let me just hit a couple more of these. Norway selected FAPI 2, deployed in almost all of their healthcare personnel. Steiner gave a number of presentations last year at EIC and the OAuth workshop in this regard that are well received. Those have been published to the OpenID Foundation website. So if you'd like to review those are available. Here in Japan, Minibank selected FAPI for Minibank to excel of insurance with partners. And then moving on to Germany, again, a private ecosystem, yes.com, launched a private sector open banking ecosystem and has selected FAPI 2.0. In the US, the foundation has been fortunate to be able to meet with and provide comments on the CFPB, which is the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. They are the rulemaking entity in the US. And again, we anticipate that they'll point to FDX and FAPI 1 with a potential transition to FAPI 2.0 when they publish their findings. And then just to finish up, Gail highlighted this earlier. We just learned not long recently that the United EAU has selected FAPI, and Gail and Joseph have had recent conversations with them about certification, the value of certification. So we'll continue to support them in that regard. And also recently, we learned that Colombia, again, Gail mentioned this earlier on, has draft regulations confirming FAPI 2.0 as has been selected. And Joseph and Gail recently briefed a leading bank on our efforts, both with respect to FAPI 2.0 and certification. So I'd like to turn it over to Elcio now. Again, Elcio is with Chicago Advisory Partners. Elcio and Chicago are board members of the foundation. And more specifically, Chicago Advisory Partners are the managing entity for Open Finance Brazil. So.
Thank you, Mike.
Doesn't work, so just use the arrow key.
Okay. Hey. Thank you all for the opportunity to share what we are doing at Brazil. We'll start with outlook, because Open Finance is one of the initiatives in Brazil, and we have another ones happening that is changing, transforming the way that the people are dealing with the system and the companies. So in the agenda, we will do the Brazilian scenario, the Open Finance, and the security agenda that we adopt in developing Brazil in this partnership. So what's the context in the financial system in Brazil? We are seeing that the convergence to the digital place and the moneyless paradigm is getting bigger in Brazil. A difference between I didn't travel with any money to Japan, and I need money to take the things here. In Brazil, we don't have wallet anymore. We just have cell phones. So this is a little bit different kind of experience that I've been here. So in Brazil, three great programs are transformation, the way that we deal with money, we make business, and the payment system. So the instant payment, that is called the Pix in Brazil, they already are processing 2,000 millions of reais by day. And we do not use more debit cards from the bank. So it's a business that's peer-to-peer, it's B2C, it's B2B, B2B2C. So a great change. In the Open Finance, we disintermediate the data between the players, and nowadays we connect the Open Finance with the Pix. So from any channel, you can pay your bills, make investments, buy products in shops, and you don't need to be in your account. You can move your money by Open Finance and Pix from the channel, and from the seller to the buyer. And then nowadays we are talking about our digital currency that's called the DREX, that you see a little bit more. That's another way to connect the ecosystem. So a little bit about the numbers that we have in Brazil. So the numbers of Open Finance are huge, 27 million of consents, plus 500 companies in the ecosystem, the relying parties and the banks are mandatory, the big banks are mandatory, the relying parties are growing up. We have a 3 years ecosystem, is a baby or a child ecosystem. The PIX are 4 years, and we are processing. We are the PIX in Brazil are the most used payment system, and he ultrapass credit cards, debit cards, and other ways of payments in Brazil. And we are working this year to start to build our platform ecosystem for our digital currency. So these three things together are transforming the way we are doing business there in Brazil. So in the Open Finance, when we talk about security in 500 institutions and 200 million is the population of Brazil, we have a bunch of approaches to manage security. So we have the consent management platform, we have the adoption of the FAPI, and we start with the FAPI 1.0, and you are now making a new version of our profile of FAPI. We invest in security monitoring, so we can monitoring all the transactions that we are dealing with the participants. They send metadata to our central platform there. We are talking about digital certificates. So we have we developed with the Brazilian government a chain of certificates that can be applied to all the messages that are communicated in the ecosystem. We approach with the certification of the participants. It's mandatory in Brazil. It's so many participants with so many maturity. So the certification gives us a vanilla state to get in the ecosystem. No one that is not certification can enter in the ecosystem. And we developed some tools that we can, in a monthly basis, check if the implementations are compliance with the OpenID Foundation's FAPI profile. So it's a bunch of approaches to guarantee and give credibility to the customers, to the companies, to use the ecosystem to change their way to manage their data and make their payments. So what's our history there with FAPI? So in the beginning, we start with the FAPI 1 with a bunch of profiles, with private key, with MTLS, and all their combinations with PAR, JARM, and etc. It was an approach that doesn't create barriers for the participants to enter in the ecosystem. The trade-off about this is the cost of certification, the cost of development, and the interoperability issues that we have faced in the beginning of the years. So, and in the last year, we decided to simplify it. Now we are going to a more standardized approach. We selected the private key with PAR standard. So we developed it with OpenID Foundation, the evolution of our profile to simplify it and to get more to address the interoperability issues that we have. Nowadays, we look for the FAP2, something that are in the draft to see how can we manage this in the timing for the next 2 years. And in this in this quarter, we are working hardly to deliver the FAPI2 certification and go lives to the participants in the end of March. So it was a huge road with the OpenID Foundation that we're thankful, and with all the persons that are involved with it. But I think what we are doing for the 500 participants there will decrease their costs, will simplify their lives, will simplify our lives in managing the ecosystem. And it was hard to make this decision how to adopt, but it has to be made, and it will be easy for us to grow the ecosystem with this standard that is now more simplified. So this is a little bit of deep dive what we are doing in Brazil. So feel free to ask questions. Thank you.
I guess we can field the question for me, Mike, and Elcio at the same time. FAPI-related questions. If there is anything, please.
Any other comments on product or ecosystem capabilities like digital identity you and I have talked about before? Are there any other areas of growth that the central bank or Chicago Advisory Partners you're already starting to think about?
The Brazilian has a digital government strategy that is designed for the next few years with many approaches. In the identity agenda, we have a gov.br that's almost 105,000 million of people already make his register in the gov.br. So it's a unique identity that is growing in Brazil that provides the confiability of the public services. And this is one that is a little huge for us. And nowadays we are launching, in Brazil, we have just, we don't have a federal ID. We have a CPF and states IDs. So we are solving these problems through a unique ID in Brazil that is growing up now, that our friend from the government share with us in the Seed Hub. So this will help us address some challenge that we have of identifier people in different silos for the financial institution. I think these are the main agenda of the government to increase the use of GovBR and unifying the identification in entire Brazil.
Following up that, so what protocol is it using in the GovBR?
I don't know exactly what the protocol, but we use it for authenticate the protocol of OpenID Connect. But inside of the use of GovBR to decrease it, I don't know this.
But you're using OpenID Connect.
Yes, we use OpenID Connect.
Okay, then I can put it in my wiki. So
yeah.
From this Tuesday, I've been collecting the list of countries, and it's already over 20. But it's not related to FAPI, but I'm collecting the list of countries who's implementing OpenID Connect in the national identity scheme.
You can use it.
Mark? Oh, which one first?
Thank you. So Elcio, I understand that Brazil is going to be adopting SIBA and specifically FAPI SIBA. Could you tell us a little about that, and in particular, the use cases that are driving it?
We use in the payment use cases the the approach of not necessarily getting the person getting out the channel that they are making the business to their payer or their banking account. So the hybrid flow is the current use there, and we don't want to use more the hybrid flow because from the experience, it shows us by data that the conversion rate of a hybrid flow for the payment system is lower than other experiences that we have, like paying to get some food in the house that you like the credit card and the wallet is gave to us. So we need to end this one. SIBA is one of the ways that we can don't need to use the hybrid flow, and you are trying to aim another ways to not let the customer leave the channel that they are dealing to make their payment on their bank account. So we are trying to use some shared signals, something like that we see now, because the authorization is in the banks, not in the channel that the company is. So the deal that the banks and the RPs are trying to make is if the shared signals is enough, or if you have to tie this thing in the other way. But the central bank are pushing to get this tie more easily to make this and control this with another fraud fraud systems here. So SIBA is a way. I don't know if it will be the way, but we are preparing for this. But we are testing another ways to make this happen and to not use the hybrid flow for the payments. It's like we are using the card on file that we use in the wallet, but we are using the account on file to create a vínculo between the RP and the OP and the customer with their device.
Yep. So thank you all. And this is just for my curiosity, but so are there any plan or actual implementation of connecting the ecosystem between the different countries? So for example, connecting the Brazilian open banking system with the open banking system in UK and vice so because a couple years ago when I firstly heard about FAPI, there were only just UK and Brazil, but now since there are many countries that have been implementing, and I'm personally hoping Japan would do that too, and so in then, as Gail have firstly mentioned, so the currency sounds to be can be used over countries, but as of the current banking system, it's very difficult to send money from one country to another country. But I thought whether the open banking system and internationally connecting open banking system would make the things easier, and are there any plans or actual implementations with this in FAPI?
I think I can answer in two ways. In the beginning of our ecosystem, we decided to adopt international patterns. So we are not creating something for Brazil or to Brazil. We wanted to be ready when this became a reality. This was our strategic decision there, and adopting the OpenID standards and other standards are aiming to this. And has the federated standard that the OpenID are working could help to connect ecosystem and ecosystem. So it's a way. We are seeing that the other ecosystem that are starting to designing are trying to make in a different way, without a center part, just a peer-to-peer connect. This will be different of our approach there. The two ecosystems in Brazil has the same approach, It's like the approach that we have in the UK. The ecosystem in US has a different approach, a more, how can I say, a private openly approach, not so much standardized, but I think they are trying to getting this up. So this is something like that. And we have government conversations in the world that are trying to make this happen. How can I make payments cross-border without SWIFT today? We have to address these things to think about this. But in Latam, like Pix is a success in Brazil, we are seeing brokers being installed in the other countries like Uruguay, Argentina, accepting Pix, and they are in charge to make the foreign exchange. So we don't have a cross-border design yet, but the business are creating the way to make the Pix being accepted, because they have some Brazilians there, the tourists and something like that. They are creating the business. And for the sellers from the Argentina, the Uruguay and Paraguay, they are receiving their money almost instantly, different in Brazil, because you have the foreign time to make the exchange, but with a lower fees than the other payment arrangements. So this is one approach, and has some use cases that you already saw. The immigrant use case, when an immigrant change the account for work, for something like that, it's hard to getting a bank account, to getting some access. So open banking can enable it. So this is what we are talking about, to start with a small but a smart use case to enabling it in adopting the standards.
So a couple of things, and Dima, I'll put you on the spot in a minute, because as Nat mentioned, Dima wrote one of the white papers on this exact topic on behalf of a whole community of experts that have been working on open banking in multiple jurisdictions, and to try and share the best practice. And while I walk this over to Dima, I'll mention that in a conversation with the UAE government, they mentioned that there was a trilateral discussion between the UAE, Brazil, and the UK to explore interoperating open banking. And that was under the auspices of the Bank of International Settlements. So I don't know how far they've gone in that, but at least there's an aspiration. And the UAE hasn't even launched yet, and they're already moving down that path. So I think this is somewhat inevitable. But Dima, please share.
So I probably can add a couple of things to this question. The question makes a lot of sense, especially noticing that a lot of countries, they do tend to standardize on a similar profile. Even the evolution of open banking in Australia, and looking at evolution of open banking and FAPI profile in Brazil, they are converging on a similar technical pattern for data exchange. So it does make sense from a technical perspective. We have all the tools. From the regulators' perspective, they've been focusing hard enough on opening up ecosystems, their own ecosystem within their own jurisdictions so far. From a user perspective, especially for migration and travel use cases, we know this is super useful. And from global reliant party perspective, there are a lot of reliant parties that operate globally. They would love to have one mechanism of doing, or one technical mechanism of doing those things, open finance related use cases. The only other comment I'll make would be, FAPI provides us with a framework for data exchange, secure data exchange. One of the things that we experimented with within the GamePOC community is the trust between global ecosystems, and the same framework that we've sort of designed within GamePOC community collectively that can be used for digital identity can also be used for connecting open banking ecosystems across the globe. So that's that trust management layer, or control layer, as we call it.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Joseph Heenan. I'm the lead of the OpenID Foundation certification team. So I just want to give you a bit of an update on the latest status of the certification program. So the objective of the program is very much to ensure that people implement and deploy the OpenID Foundation specifications, of which there are now lots, in a way that they are actually interoperable and people do implement the security properties of the specs correctly. And we do that through a set of open source testing tools, and it's a self-certification process. Once you pass the test, you send the submission to us and pay the fee, and then that gives you the rights to use the OpenID certified logo, and you get listed on our website as a certified implementation. So currently we have certification programs for OpenID Connect, OpenID Connect Logout and Session Management, FAPI1 Advanced, FAPI2 Security Profile, the latest implementers draft. We have partial support for FAPI2 message signing, the current implementers draft, and we also have tests for FAPI CIBA implementers draft 1. As Torsten mentioned, we're currently working on tests for OpenID for verifiable presentations. There is a beta of that available. It has some limitations in terms of which parts of the spec it supports and which credential formats are supported. But if anybody's interested in running that, do drop the certification team an email and we'll point you in the right direction. We've had tests available in beta for a while for OpenID Connect for identity assurance. Again, with that spec hopefully moving to final this year, we would then update those tests and hopefully launch a certification program once the working group feels the tests are ready. We're still working on some parts of the FAPI2 spec, in particular Depop and HTTP signatures, which weren't part of FAPI1, so needed a substantial amount of development effort. And we've also started work on OpenID for verifiable credential issued tests, but there's nothing actually available for anyone to try running yet. In terms of the future roadmap for this year, we're looking to get tests for OpenID Federation implemented. That's because that specification is being used by the ConnectID ecosystem, and Dima from ConnectID has helpfully arranged for us to have directed funding to help implement those tests, which is greatly appreciated. Similarly, the FAPI2 version of CIBA, we need to do tests for that. And the Japanese government has also provided us with some directed funding, or will be providing us with some directed funding for the OpenID for verifiable credentials test. So again, we're very grateful for that, and that will help speed up the test development, and they will also be helping test the tests over the next few months, which is also very valuable. So a few of the things that we've delivered over the last 6 months or so. As LCO mentioned, Brazil has a new, much simpler profile of FAPI1 Advanced, so we've implemented that and started getting certification requests in for that. That is going to be a big benefit for that ecosystem, and it actually also makes the certification team's life easier as well, being a simpler profile. As Mike mentioned, we've launched certification for the Saudi Arabia open banking profile. Got, I think, all the banks there certified now. We've launched FAPI CIBA relying party tests. That was something although we've had FAPI CIBA tests for the authorization server for quite a while now, we never had the RP tests. So Brazil Open Finance actually provided some funding for that. So again, thank you very much to LCO for sorting out that funding for us. We've launched the FAPI2 OP and RP tests, as I mentioned. The FAPI2 ConnectID profiles. ConnectID are using FAPI2 live in their ecosystem. And we've also been looking to tackle some technical debts, bring some of our dependencies up to date, and generally tidy things up a bit, as the project's kind of 5 years old now, and some things we haven't been paying as much attention to as we should have, whilst we concentrated on actually developing tests and so on. And I think, as Mike mentioned, one of the big things we're expecting to see this year is the United States and Canada hopefully both adopting some FAPI and hopefully certification in some way. But we're very much still waiting for the details of what's going to happen there. It's not entirely clear what's going to happen in either ecosystem about certification. And I think that's my last slide. So I guess any questions? Yeah, I did go through that very quickly because we are running very much behind schedule. So if anybody does have any questions, feel free to come and ask me afterwards or drop the certification team an email. Our email address is all over the OpenID website.
Thank you, and appreciate the speedy tour of the certification team who has been intensely busy in the last couple of months. So the challenge is on. I have 2 minutes to present, and you all, similar to Joseph, will probably be asking me questions offline. The good news about the City Hub conversation, those of you coming tomorrow, I'll spend another 10 minutes or so talking about the key themes, and so there'll be more opportunities. But I'll, I'm timing myself. Can I, in 2 minutes, give you the headlines? So, and you actually understand what I say. There it is, Sustainable, Interoperable, and Digital Identity Hub. It is a community. It is not an entity, but it is a newly formed community formed about 6 months ago, and we had a first event a couple of months back, in November. And the idea was, we need to build off of these existing digital identity implementations in different countries, but they're not currently going down a path where they will inherently be interoperable with each other. Maybe there are exceptions where they would interoperate, and the entire EU, one could argue, is an exception with the digital wallet initiative. But what about all the other jurisdictions? How is it going to work in practice? We're not on a path to get there. I will skip this, and I will focus on this wonderful page, which is to say, in the space of just a couple short months, we shared this problem about interoperability of digital identity credentials, and a whole bunch of people said, yes, we think we'd like to get into a room and discuss how this could work in practice. And we had the 22 countries, including the EU. We had 17 different nonprofit organizers, and we had a raft of other additional standards bodies and nonprofit experts, including those from some representatives from the Japanese government. It was just the very first conversation. And the important point, a lot of people couldn't come. Very good. You can see Nat up there. Looks good, Nat. And 92% of all of those illustrious attendees and experts said, we need to continue this conversation into 2024. And we need to define what we need to do to achieve digital identity interoperability. So we're kicking off 5 work streams, and one of them will be defining the use cases. Why would we need digital identity interoperability is the first part. What are the minimum requirements for interoperability? How do we map the trust frameworks? I failed in my 2 minutes, by the way. Yeah, bummer. Metrics of success and the future governance model. So what we do in the short term may be all community-based, but what do we need in terms of real governance over time? And you can think about things like the UN public key directory under ICAO as an example of how that might look like at some stage in the medium distant term. So lots of use cases, brainstorming, lots of good stuff happening. I wanted to just, hit this before we parted, which is that we anticipate having many virtual conversations and work streams and presentations at various illustrious conferences, but we think we'll need to have a handful of in-person summits with experts, and those will be on different continents. So we're planning to do a day before the ID for Africa conference in Cape Town. Then we'll do a day before the European Cloud Conference in Berlin, probably a day before the AMBA, which is the Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators, a day before that in Atlanta. And then come Q4, we think either Tokyo or Singapore would be a good place to have a conversation, culminating in the G20, which is in Rio. And we have reason to believe that digital identity is going to be one of the key topics in Rio. So it's going to be a busy year, but we're trying to work on the substance of what it would take to enable interoperability between different countries and really try and bring that to life, not just academically, but practically, and be able to have solutions that would be possible to integrate in real products. And it's tough. So we are looking forward to all of your expert help as we go through this journey. And that's it. So I think that brings us to the end of our workshop. And hopefully we'll see many of your faces tomorrow at the summit in person. And any other parting comments? Otherwise, we will thank you. We'll bid you adieu. Any final questions, or
We can. Does anyone have any final questions for any of the presenters, Gail or otherwise, that are still around? Oh, sure.
for taking time, but where can we get the additional information? Like, is it on the OpenID Foundation's website or? Oh no, about the Gail's
the City Hub last
Yes.
bit I was talking about?
yes.
Great point. It is not written down there. It is, I might be able to write it on the screen here. Nope, I can't. It's city, SIDI hub.community. And so city, SIDI hub, HUB.community has the website with the current information. And in the next, within the next 10 days, we'll release a press release with the findings of the initial summit, including the rapporteur notes. And hopefully shortly after that, we'll release a bit more on the strategy, which is what I talked about here. These pages, Mike, we'll put on our website imminently. So there'll be a preview kind of on the OpenID Foundation website.
Yes.
We will do a blog with the whole PR thing. Yes, it just hasn't gone out to the wider public community yet. So you're on the inside track, everybody. Other questions? Tom?
Thanks. I understand that Foundation published a guidance on writing white papers in October. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
You're very, very attentive, Tom. Yes, we realized as we went through publishing about 9 or 10 papers over the last 2 years that we needed a more rigorous process. And so the board just passed a resolution a couple of months ago with a formal, it's kind of like a white paper of its own. What's the process to do a white paper to make sure it has appropriate oversight from the board as it goes through the process, and how we would work with partners, how we go through drafts, how we do distribution of comments, and make sure that the work of the white paper truly reflects our community and any other communities we collaborate with. But it's available on our website. When you go to the white paper section at the top of the page, there's a link to the process document. Does that answer? Any last questions? Did I see another hand? Okay, you're free from class. Thank you.
Thank you all.